He's
It's
younger.
progress.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't think he's come to the last two sessions.
I know last time he was.
Okay, I think it's all hooked up, so hopefully they'll. Okay. Hi, so you're fine. Oh, you're the Detroit lady I met. Yes, I remember. Okay. All right, so let me put together things that we are going to be getting to today. I'm not going to get to all of them, so you just keep them. And I also have here a map of Italy. Okay, because we've been concentrating up until now about the Jews of Italy in the 16th century.
Is that what she said?
So I'll put
The Jews of Portugal?
Okay.
All
All right. Okay.
Portugal?
Okay, so guys,
Life in the ghetto.
yeah, we're going to do Life in the Ghetto, but I just want to make one correction because obviously the dates were wrong and I looked them up again. So the one that's entitled The Jews, right, of 16th century Italy. So at the bottom of the page, we were talking about this man, Abraham probably Farasol. And I said he had lived in Mantua, and then Ferrara. He was actually born in Avignon, sur le pont d'Avignon. You know that song?
Yeah.
My mother used to sing it to me. All right, that's France, southern France. It's the Provence area. So apparently he first had. So the dates that are there refer more to the dates that he had first lived in Mantua, and the second date is Ferrara. But these are his dates, how long he actually did live. Okay, so he was actually born in 1451. So he's, again, coming from the Provence area, southern part of France. The family then moves.
This one?
Yeah, we had done it last week, but I had some wrong
The Jews of
dates.
16th century.
The Jews of 16th century Italy.
Okay.
This is the man who wrote the book about geography, and then we talked about the fact that he even included the Americas in his writings and his maps. Jews, by the way, were very famous for making maps. Right in that early, I would say later 15th century, early 16th century. Where were you up to? You had the things from last week.
I didn't bring my folder. It's
Oh, okay.
Edgar.
Okay.
It's the first time ever.
So we'll forgive you. Okay, just make sure you give it. I don't have so many extras of this.
Thank you so much.
Okay. I am just making one correction to the one that says the Jews of 16th century Italy. The Jews of 16th century Italy, right? But I'm just making a correction. I had discussed it last week, and I talked about the accomplishments. A few people are mentioned. Then what I gave you out today is that early Achronim, 16th century Italy. I'm going to
Abraham Farasol?
yeah. So that's what I'm talking about now, because the dates that are there are incorrect. Those are just the dates of when he had lived first in Mantua, and then when he moved to Ferrara. But these are his dates of his life, that he was born, it says, circa, around, we don't know exactly when he's born, 1451. Okay, the last person mentioned there, where it says, the next to the last, Abraham Farasol, that first page. Just look at the first page towards the bottom. Oh, I'm Karen. Okay.
He was born what?
So he was actually born circa 1451, and he dies in the year, even though they weren't sure, 1525 or 1526. That would then make sense that he could talk about the Americas, because obviously, it was only discovered in 1492. Okay, the other people, whatever, some of the other individuals are considered Rabbanim, so you'll see their names mentioned again. The one I just gave out today, which I don't even think I'm going to get to, but you have it. The early Achronim, 16th century Italy. All right. That's the one I had just prepared. Okay. Here. Would you like to be so kind as to give Rabbi Green one? Okay. Thank you. Okay. Excellent. Okay. So for now, we're not going to do that one about the early Achronim. Just put it aside, okay? I will get back to them later.
Rabbi Green, my ghetto.
No, I just gave him.
You just gave him something else, but
I
just
didn't
gave
give
him
him
my
the-
ghetto.
I didn't give him the earlier. Oh,
You
so
have another
Rabbi
ghetto?
Green, do you have the ones that about the life in the ghetto and then
I
the
just handed it to him.
Oh, good, and the
So
Reformation.
I need for myself,
Oh,
the life in the ghetto.
life in the ghetto. Okay,
Thank you so much.
okay, my pleasure. Okey doke. Are you all with me? I hope.
I think so.
Okay.
Life in the ghetto.
Okay, so we had, right, we're going to do life in the ghetto today because we had discussed last time that one that says the Jews of 16th century Italy, that the first ghetto with that name ghetto that was in Venice, right, in 15, I remember it's 1516 or 1517. That's when yes, right. So the one that's titled the Jews of 16th century Italy, on the third page, it says in 1516, the substitute for complete expulsion of the Jews from a community was invented in Venice. Now, as we had discussed, we, in general, those observant Jews will always gravitate to live in a neighborhood where other, religious Jews live, because you all have to be able to walk to the synagogue, and that's where you would have your schools and the mikvaot and any other trappings to make a vibrant Jewish community. But this is now going to be an enforced promulgation, and it's going to be a specific section within the town, and it will have a wall around it, which is literally locked at night. So the Jews are locked in at night. So today, we're going to do the one that says life in the ghetto. So I'll explain more about what it was like to have to live in this enclosed space.
They were locked in for the Jews.
That's right. The
Jews were.
the Jews were locked in. No,
They wanted to be locked in.
no.
I don't think
But
so.
well, but no, they did not like to be locked in. But it was to prevent, and any non-Jew, let's say perhaps who worked there or had business dealings, they had to be out of there. So I don't know what time it was. Let's say 6 o'clock at night, whatever they decided. That's it. All non-Jews had to be out. And any Jew, working in it was a curfew. And the community had to be back within. And afterwards, you couldn't get back in. If you were caught outside, you obviously could be arrested and incarcerated. Okay. All right. So just say this, the Jews of 16th century Italy, because gives just an overview of what life was like in that century. So again, 16th century, we're talking about the 1500s. So now let's just focus on life in the ghetto and what it was like to have to live in this very constrained, area of the town. Living in the ghetto was compulsory for all Jews. You did not have a choice about it. They could live nowhere else, whereas Christians could live anywhere they wanted, but not in the ghetto. That was the one place they could not live. The ghetto was thus fixed by law as the exclusively legal district for Jewish residents. How this came to be what to do with the Jews. And remember, we had discussed all those terrible anti-Jewish methods and accusations, heaped upon the Jews throughout that medieval period. Okay. But until the 16th century, it had been only partly successful. They could not seem to get rid of us, right? They wanted to. There were several reasons why the ghetto came into existence just at this juncture in time. Okay, now we're going to discuss why. Okay, first, those edicts of expulsion from Spain and Portugal, considered the most advanced European states of the day. Remember, these were very, very wealthy countries at that point in the course of history. Spread the idea that Jews ought not to be permitted to live in Christian society. They didn't want to see us, they don't want anything to do with us, and they wanted to expel us. And like, we were these evil people, and causing all kinds of detriment, to their Christian lives. So they wanted to expel us. Spain's example even bore fruit in the land as distant as Lithuania. I mean, this will be a later point, but they're just saying this idea that it is a good idea to expel. This is, yes, right. But I'm not quite up to there.
No, I want.
Does she have the others? Hold on, just a minute. Yes, what?
Life in the ghetto and the Reformation.
But this is my last one, so better not be anybody else who wants this, because that's the last one. Okay. All right, so you have to understand. So now it's already in the minds of the people in the 15th century that it's okay to expel your Jewish population, right, from your country, the entire country. All right. By the middle of the 16th century, there was also a revival of bigotry, and that's because of the Protestant Reformation, which we will do as a separate unit. Just to know that it comes into existence. And Luther, we'll compare his writings from the earlier part of when the Protestant Reformation came into being to the latter part, and how his attitude towards the Jews changed. I mean, just unbelievable. You'll see what ugly things he was promulgating at that time period. At the same time, Catholicism was fighting the new Protestant heresies with its counter-Reformation. And when we talk about Italy, all right, because we're focusing now about Italy, Italy is a Catholic country. I don't know, maybe there are some Protestants who live there, but it has always been a Catholic country, and that and recognizing, right, that the Pope is the head of the church. All right, remember, thinking about the Reformation, we're thinking about Germany, actually northern Germany. The church branded the new religious movements as being born under Jewish influence. I mean, it doesn't matter what we do. You'd like it more into more modern times. They accuse us of being capitalists. No, then they accuse us of being communists. Well, which is it? But they like to brand us, unfortunately, under these general categories. And it's always ends up being negative, in their treatment of us. Thus, both branches of Christianity made the treatment of the Jews as social undesirables, a test of religious zeal. So, the more you attack them, the better it is. 3, I'm up to the third section. Moreover, the old economic source of trouble for the Jews gained in intensity. What are we always accused of? The fact that the money lenders, the graspers, the whatever. Just like it was, no matter what we did, I mean, we're just viewed as these terrible people who will not adopt Christianity as their religion, and therefore they are outcasts in society. Many Christians had long desired that their Jewish competitors be expelled. In other instances, Christian princes or the patricians, that would be like noblemen, who ruled over many important cities, felt that they could ill afford to deprive themselves of the income which the presence of Jews brought to the, so like we're caught in this bind. They don't want us there, but they do want our money. Okay, so it's really never. Since in Germany and Italy, each city or district could follow an independent policy. Remember, I told you at this point, it will not be till the 19th century. Italy and Germany are not unified, all right? They're divided up into many different sections, and each one, will have its own separate laws and regulations. Some of the rulers yielded to the popular and ecclesiastical, and its church, pressure to expel the Jews, while others compromised by putting their Jewish subjects into a ghetto. So you can understand, they, as much as they hate us and they would like to expel us, as Spain did, and with Portugal, but had this edict of expulsion, which I told you that was really just a means then to keep the Jews there, right? They forcibly baptized them all. But economically, doesn't make sense for these Jews in Italy and Germany to totally, they might be expelled from one principality to another, one specific area to another. You'll see even in the Papal States, I mean, it consisted of many cities. So we might have been expelled from a particular town, but we could go to live in another town. I think Nebuch, all these things we talk about are about the men. Can you imagine being, a mother, and having this terrible upheaval in your life, you know, like maybe you'll be lucky you live 5 years in one particular place. You know, you get permission, and then you have to pack up everything and schlep all your children, your pots and pans, and move to another area. And there too, maybe you get 7 years. Again, you're expelled and you have to go live in another area. But you can see they don't want to totally get rid of us, again, because we are a source of income to the, because, and they taxed us very heavily for permission that we could live in their particular town or region. Okay. So that's why they came up with the idea of the ghetto. But we don't really want to, you know, them in our midst. We don't have to want to see them, you know, on a daily basis. So let's force them that they have to live in a separate, usually the poor section of town. Okay. Jewish life from the fifth. So I'm on page 2, right? Jewish life from the 15th century on was the result of the interplay of these forces, the ones I just discussed with you. And we'll start now, actually, in Germany. The important Jewish community of Regensburg was expelled in 1519, fundamentally because a number of rival princes could not agree as to who was entitled to the income from the Jews. Lovely, yes. Yeah, they each wanted our money, but some claimed, oh, they're in my territory. No, they're in my territory. So they want the money. It's the bottom line. Okay, in Florence, all right, now back to Italy. The ruling Medici family considered it advantageous to itself to permit a number of Jews to settle in their city. They're coming from northern Florence. In Venice, the question whether the Jews should be expelled or permitted to stay was debated for a long time. The ghetto was a compromise between these two possibilities. Still, during the 16th century, there were several occasions when it looked as though the Jewish population would be told to go. So as I told you, they are expelled countless times, and every X number of years, you know, we were forced to leave a certain town or region and move elsewhere. But Venice was a big commercial city. It had been for centuries now, and the Jews were very prominent in the trade and the commerce at an earlier date, but gradually Christians took over that role. So we are now, you know, they still want us, you know, to use us as a source of income, you know, for their area. On the other hand, they're not permitting us to engage in certain types of trade, but, you know, we're going to be restricted as to the ways that we can earn an income. Its rulers saw the advantages which the Jews of nearby cities, such as those in Turkey, like Constantinople, Adrianople, brought to the Ottoman Empire. The Jews, therefore, were permitted to stay under fewer restrictions than anywhere else. Now, remember, we're talking about Venice, which is going to have the first ghetto. So they still want their Jews there, but God forbid that they should live near us, you know, or, you know, exactly. We don't want to get too close to them. Now, yes. Regensburg. I told you it's Germany. It's Germany. Okay, it's going back and forth here with certain key towns, either in Germany and or Italy. They have somewhat similar histories. Okay. As for the Jews of Frankfurt, you do know that is Germany. Okay, they were under, I presume it's Frankfurt on Main. They were under the protection of the German emperor. Okay, the Holy Roman Emperor. Who ruled over, he was also over Spain, but Germany, but again, Spain is one complete country, but Germany is a very divided country. So he only had, he's recognized by all the German principalities as being the emperor, but his powers are somewhat diminished because each duke or prince, you know, is going to claim, you know, first dibs, you know, in his area. But during that medieval period, the Jews were considered to be, so to speak, the emperor's Jews, all right? Because obviously we weren't really wanted by anybody else, but the emperor liked us again because we added money to his coffers, all right? So they, in Frankfurt, under protection of the emperor. Consequently, they were not expelled, but were placed within the walls of a ghetto. I don't know what it would have felt like being a Jew living, in those times. I mean, it's like, like we're needed and wanted as a source of income, but we're hated and reviled, and and you can't live with stability if you never know when you're going to be expelled, from a particular region. I would say the 14th century is one of the most awful times in the medieval era. And even though now, this is concomitant with the era of the Renaissance. And we look at the Renaissance as being, a time period where there's this flowering of culture and art and architecture and like an opening of men's minds. Yet because of, at the same time period, is going to be the Reformation, and then we'll get the attacks from the Protestants, but also the Counter-Reformation, which was, of course, initially directed towards those who broke away from the Catholic Church. But we're always blamed somehow, and are always like a very ready source. They already hate us, so it's good to attack us as well. So we're always caught there. Now I'll talk about a little bit about the Jews of Rome. The fate of the Jews of Rome depended largely on the character of the reigning pope. Some liked us, a lot of them didn't like us, right? In general, they lived in comparative peace, which is sort of ironic, that the Pope, again, head of the Catholic Church, this is in the midst of the Counter-Reformation, a lot of turmoil within Christianity at this time period. But again, we were considered the Pope's Jews. So our lot sometimes was better, right, in Rome itself than it might have been elsewhere, even within Italy. During the 15th century, and this is now also the beginning of the age of humanism, I usually associate in my mind, from when I learned world history, I think of Erasmus, in humanism, but he's from Holland, if I remember correctly. All right. But again, the idea of expanding our minds and being open to some other ideas, this is what's going on at the same time as they're still harking back to their old ugly ways of how they, view the Jew who lives in their midst. Of course, then we go to that period of the Counter-Reformation. A number of popes reacted to the rising tide of Protestantism, although it doesn't appear in Italy itself. Italy was always and has always remained a Catholic country. But now it's not going to be just Germany where the Reformation is going to have an impact. I'll list in a little bit all the other countries, but it's really going to spread throughout Western Europe and to many other lands. So how do they do? So they wanted to show, their zeal for the Catholic Church, talking about the Pope's attitude. Paul IV was an especially zealous churchman. He made it his duty to lead in making Jewish life as difficult as possible. In July 1555, or right smack in the middle of the 16th century, he issued a particularly vicious anti-Jewish decree. No amount of effort on the part of the Jewish community could save them from imprisonment within a ghetto's walls. So even though the ghetto was starting, right, 1517, 1516, in Venice, it is now going to spread to other towns, all right, both within Italy and in Germany. Okay, the worst section of the town was usually the one set apart for Jewish habitation. In Rome, the ghetto was near the Tiber River, which frequently overflowed, leaving a layer of filth and causing perpetually unhealthy conditions. I know that if you have been to the city of Rome and where the ghetto is, there actually are sections there where you can see where there were the gates that led to outside the ghetto. And the walls don't exist anymore. They were torn down. It's actually thanks to Napoleon, right? That came to an end. And it's very close to the Tiber River. When you go out of the area that they call, the ghetto, it's still called that. That's where the huge Italian Roman synagogue is. There's a street, I forget its name, and just like on the other side of that, that's where the embankments are. Now, the embankments years ago, like now we're talking about 16th century, were much lower than they are today because the Tiber constantly overflowed and brought filth to all the areas, near the Tiber. But in those days, it was much lower. And again, the Jews were now forced to live in the worst section of town. And so the houses were constantly being inundated. We had no proper sewage treatments. I mean, everything would be thrown into the street and go into the river. And then if it flooded, it all came back into your town or your section of the town. So it caused perpetually unhealthy conditions everywhere. The ghetto was too small for the number of people forced to be confined within its walls. Hitler certainly learned a lot from, learning this history. Houses ended up being situated very close to one another. In other words, I don't know, let's say it's large enough for 500 people and they stuff in 700 people. Okay, so where are these extra people going to live? So the houses are tight next to one another. And one more thing, in order to expand, additional stories had to be added to existing homes, making them several stories taller than in other parts of town. And what happened is the higher up you went, then it sort of leaned slightly, toward. So the amount of air and light that's able to come into these homes in the ghetto, it gets darker and darker, dingier. Right? The streets were narrow, and the tall houses prevented the sun from penetrating the dark, unsanitary alleys. Now, should you ever go to Rome and go to the section where the ghetto is, I mean, now it's considered a trendy area. Very good kosher restaurants. Excellent food there. And the shul, which was built at a much later time in the 19th century, very magnificent. Can't understand a thing there's davening there, but but it's very beautiful. So I can. It's fascinating to go there. But now they have different places where there's a plaza, which are more open areas. So nowadays it's not so terrible. And I told you the Tiber cannot overflow there anymore because they built up the embankments, so that wouldn't happen. Okay. Okay, let's a little bit more about the ghetto. I've never been to Venice, but I mean, they have, the ghetto area is there as well. The few streets or alleys which constituted the ghetto were walled up to prevent free entry or exit. You always had to go, there were maybe a few gates, within the ghetto, but you had to show, you have permission, you have some reason why you wanted to leave, right? Maybe some business things, or maybe you're going to visit somebody, I don't know. I mean, you'd be visiting somebody elsewhere, right, in another town. And then when you came back again, before the curfew took effect, again, you would have to prove that you do have permission because I live in the ghetto, right? And I told you any non-Jew had to leave at that point, at that hour. Okay, talked about the gates. That the gates were locked at night, and they were guarded by non-Jewish watchmen. They wouldn't trust a Jew, right? To enforce the rules. No Jew could remain outside the ghetto. No Christian could remain within it. Okay, the gates of guards presumably protected, right, the ghetto against marauders, but mobs of attackers often managed to break inside and wreak havoc on the inhabitants. So you could view it from the Jews' perspective, those who were locked in at night. Well, maybe then they felt, okay, we're free of those non-Jews, we conduct our lives. But there were always reasons why the mob wanted to attack us. And believe me, they could. Again, who's guarding these gates? It's non-Jews. Well, you see this mob in front of you, come right in, right? Don't get me involved in this. Now, how could you tell that somebody was a Jew? I mean, this has gone down through the ages. We're not like Black people, we're white. So, and we really can look like anybody else, in a town. Not only were the Jews forbidden to adorn themselves with expensive clothing or ornaments, all right, so we couldn't go out dressed very fancily, but they were ordered to wear peculiar peaked hats. I've seen pictures of it. All right, and yellow badges. This is not the yellow star as the Nazis imposed, but it was some sort of a yellow. But if those of you who have been with me from when I did about the Jews living under Islam, that was an idea that the Muslims enforced. That how could they tell, in the Muslim lands who was not, a Muslim? So there were different colors. It's like the Christians, if I remember correctly, had to wear like a blue patch or hat. The Jews had to wear yellow. If you were, let's say, Zoroastrian, maybe theirs was black. I can't remember. I taught this, a little while ago. But the idea specifically of that yellow is designated with a Jew. That is coming from the Muslims, all right? But the Christians say, geez, that's a great idea. So they adopted it as well.
Why yellow? That's what they picked.
I know, that's what they, right. I mean, we obviously look at that with great negativity. But I don't know in those days that there was anything untoward about the color yellow.
It's just the
Two
color.
ladies wearing yellow. So, it's, but whatever. It's, as I say, it starts with the Muslims. There was actually a law called the Pact of Omar. I mean, it wasn't always enforced every place in the Muslim world, depending how they viewed, the Jews within their midst in any particular region. But then now, the Christians are going to adopt this. Just a great idea. This is a great way to, to identify who is a Jew or not. I mean, why would anybody who wasn't a Jew would even want to wear this? It's because it was a means to, now mark these individuals, knowing that they are Jews, free fall, attack them at will. Okay. As soon as a Jew would venture outside the ghetto, he would become the butt of ridicule and assault by the town's ruffians. In practice, the ghetto regulations about exit and entrance were not always strictly enforced. Okay. So again, depending on the attitudes of the ruling powers that be, or even the general population, sometimes, it wasn't all totally, completely, as if they were living in this very frightened existence. Sometimes times were better. I mean, we're still required to live in the ghetto. We can't go out, but things were not always strictly enforced. The Jews in Italy, I once read a book. It was called The Italians. So it was analyzing the mindset of Italians as opposed to other Europeans. They're more laid back. They, they're not, they weren't as anti-Semitic as we'll see in Germany, and then later obviously in Poland and Russia. So living there was not the world's end. Okay. Shabbos afternoons, they would often take walks along the riverbanks or the less crowded city avenues. Okay. But obviously, they're still doing this in the daytime. By nightfall, they still have to be back within the ghetto gates. The descendants of those who had been Europe's merchants and then its bankers, right? We had risen to some pretty high positions, in well, specifically, I would say Italy. They are now reduced to a much lower economic level. At this time period, Christians had already taken over the profitable occupations of trade and money lending. All right. That's what money lending led to the banking business. Okay. Right. Okay. The whole point originally why we were the ones relegated because we, as non-Christians, we could charge interest. Okay. But now everybody can charge interest. So, it didn't matter. So that was a means of, income for the Jewish population, but now it's taken away from us because there are other, there's now Christian people who are engaged in that business. So I might have mentioned this at one point. So the two main occupations open to Jews were the trade in secondhand goods. All right. We had learned, I think last week we discussed, some of that's how they got into the rags business, right? And which we would call schmatters, right? That would be more Eastern European, but already this is Western Europe, and so you can't be the big, traders. You can no longer be the main bankers, but you can deal with secondhand goods or clothing. And the lending of small sums of money in exchange for a pledge of an article, which is pawnbroking. You ever see the pawnbroker? I mean, that's in America, but that was okay. So not, the Rothschilds are a separate, issue. We'll talk about that at a later point. Right now, we're really sort of focusing more on Italy, so that the Jews did engage. Like the Merchant of Venice, right? What is right? That he's also, is engaging in money lending activities. It was on a much lower level than a banker would have. Okay. I mean, the Rothschilds started off like this too, and then whatever, they were pretty savvy, especially the father, but the sons as well. Okay, within the ghetto, rooms used for sleeping at night became workshops during the day. And this makes me think, I'm sure, the Lower East Side, right? How maybe it was the men who engaged more with the general public, but it would be those women who, that they would have became seamstresses and workshop. So they might take these rags that their husbands, were collecting, bring it back. They could probably, wash them, launder them, maybe piece them together, and then they would be resold. All right. These women repaired the old clothes and other articles bought by the men, and the men sold them for a very low profit. They were not making a lot of money doing this, that's for sure. Okay, page 4. Every ghetto had a number of families who managed to escape the grinding poverty of most of the inhabitants. There were always those people, right? Savvier business people, accrue a lot more money, and they sometimes got permission to live outside the walls of the ghetto. Okay, 1 or 2 might be physicians, all right? And there were we'll see when we concentrate on even those achronim, these rabbonim. A lot of them were doctors. That was considered a very fine profession. But the non-Jews would make use of our skills in medicine. And this would continue despite the prohibitions of the church in seeking out the services of Jewish doctors. So like on the books, they could only deal with their own people. But hey, people came to them. They knew they were very knowledgeable, and they made use of their services. A small number of other Jews also rose through their business acumen to become financial advisors to the local bishop or prince. Still others, able to amass sufficiently ready funds, were able to lend larger sums of money. I mean, this is what happens with the Rothschilds, right? He starts off, very little, but gradually he's going to increase, the amount of money that he has, and whatever. That's how they end up going to the banking business. To various well-heeled Christians of the upper class. An example of such a Jew, I don't know who this man is, but I found it in one of the sources. His name was Mordechai Meisel of Prague. So we're talking about Bohemia. Okay. This financial ability brought him to the attention of the emperor. Okay, you have to understand, Bohemia was also under the rule of the Holy Roman Emperor. The maps have over centuries have to be constantly redrawn because borders, will change. Right? His financial ability brought him to the attention of the emperor, who did him the honor of borrowing money from him. How nice. Okay, yes. But look at this. But when in 1601 Meisel died childless, the emperor simply confiscated all his wealth.
Wow.
Yeah. It was thanks to the wealthy Jews of the ghetto, though, that the Jewish community was able to pay the onerous taxes that were annually imposed upon them. So they were really dependent on these Jews who earned larger incomes they weren't, so everybody had to pay something into the coffers, because the emperor, or let's say a pope, pope included, but, other heads of different, sections of a country, they would say to the Jews, well, you owe us, I don't want to say what this is worth, 26,000 florins. I don't care where you're going to find it, but that's what you owe me, and it's due by such and such a date. So obviously the wealthier people gave a larger proportion, but everybody had to contribute maybe even just 5 florins or something, into this total sum. Okay, without such payments, the Jews would have been deemed useless to the rulers. They really wanted us as a source of money, and we would be subject to banishment and exile. The poorer Jews recognized their dependence upon the few wealthy families in their midst and entrusted them with the overall rule of their communities. So now we're going to talk about how the Jewish community was organized. The structure of the ghetto was on the whole similar to that which had existed during the Middle Ages. And I remember when we learned about the Jews in the medieval era, a lot of these institutions, internal institutions had already been established. So they're just going to continue now into the era of the Renaissance and the Reformation. There was a community head who's called a parnas, all right, and a community council, the Gabayim, who were elected. Now, Shalom, my son is going to talk about the Western Sephardim. So I believe their council is called the Ma'amad, and again, there would have been, people more of means who got this position, and then they would have represented the Jewish community to that outside world. The voters, though, were limited to those who could afford to pay taxes. So you could, even though we ought to contribute to the taxes which we owe to the outside world, within our own community, who rose to prominence again would have been the wealthier people, and those poor slobs. We didn't really have a say what was going on. These voters elected a committee, which in turn selected the members of the council. This indirect method of election enabled a small number of families to perpetuate their rule over the community. And it's probably the names of those people have come down through the centuries. The council supervised the functioning of the communal institutions, the shul, of course, it's a very Yiddish word, but the synagogue, synagoga, would call it, the school, various charities, and courts of Jewish law. And you'll see this as even we go into the study of the Jews of Eastern Europe. I mean, these same patterns of organizing the Jewish community, they're all the same. They're very, very similar. These institutions in turn enforced whatever rules were adopted for the governing of the ghetto. I mean, you couldn't have just Hefkerveld, there had to be certain laws in place. And also the living very close, crowded conditions. So it was important, to have these different laws. And also the relations between the ghetto and the outside world. The council also had the power to decide how much each individual should pay in taxes. I told you, since everybody had to contribute in some way, as little as they could afford, with the major bulk coming, from these wealthier families. The taxes had to be delivered to the ruling non-Jewish authorities, and they had to be paid in a lump sum. So again, the emperor, the pope, a prince, whatever. They didn't care how the money came to them. They just decided, this is how much we want from the Jewish community. And any means you have, this is what you're owed. And if not, out. You're going to have to be expelled. We're on page 5 now, okay? The sordid districts in which the Jews lived, the miserable houses which were their homes, their precarious life on the edge of poverty, the grinding burden of heavy taxes, and the constant threat of expulsion or attack made the inhabitants of the ghetto ever conscious of the utter hopelessness of improving their life. I sometimes think, how did our ancestors, how did they, hold on to their Judaism, and like kol hakavod to them, that, they weren't quick to give it up. They took great pride, in their religion. But their lives, they're like living, betwixt and between, I say it must have been a terrible time to you never knew how stable your life was in any one place. Okay. Their religion, right? We did stay true to Yahadus. It was all that they could turn to for a measure of comfort in the study of Torah, Talmud, and Midrash. Men could forget time and place. It's true. I don't know for yourself. I know when we all have sorrows, things, problems within our lives. But when you devote yourself to just study Torah, like you're in another realm, and it takes you away from whatever may be bothering you. It's amazing. Their hopes were centered not upon any earthly rulers, obviously I couldn't possibly trust them, who were either hostile or greedy, but on the promise of a Mashiach, right, who would come to redeem them. Of course, he never has come, but who knows. In the meantime, they could only hope and pray, study and observe, labor for their families, and derive whatever joy they could out of the simple cycle of their daily lives. And how the mitzvot of the Torah, they do regulate every aspect of our lives. So it, no matter what had been going on in the outside world, but they turned inward, right? And I think the observance of the mitzvot and special occasions, within their lives just kept them going from day to day. Celebrations in the close communal quarters of the ghetto were associated with the social events that clustered about the Shabbos, right? And holidays, don't we? Right? Here we know, okay, next month will be Purim. 1 month later, we're going to have Pesach, 7 weeks later, we have Shavuos, we're always looking forward, right, to these occasions. And also there are special celebrations, within our individual lives. Joyous celebrations enabled the oppressed Jews to bring happiness into their miserable lives. Each holiday had its distinctive games for the children, appropriate foods and dishes, right, as we certainly know about, and special melodies and ceremonies to entertain and occupy all levels of society. Personal and family events also occasion other gatherings for festivities, especially celebrating weddings. But I could see also having a bris, in the family. And that was also a wonderful time, to get together and to celebrate. So again, I think we focused, we turned inwardly, and this is, again, allowed us to survive and to go on. Unfortunately, remember, I had brought this up, so it's not like they were totally immune from people leaving the Jewish faith, although obviously they would be more on the perimeters. Repeated efforts to proselytize were still heaped upon the Jews by the church. And this is just, it was in the medieval periods, continuing out into this so-called more open, society. They often invaded the synagogues, where they continued to heap abuse upon the Jewish religion. Zealous monks refused to permit the Christian population to forget the presence of the Jews behind the ghetto walls. And this would happen on a weekly basis, that preachers had the right to enter our shuls on the Shabbos. We could not leave the premises, and all they did was attack Judaism, how terrible it was, blah, 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 and talk about the glories of the Christian faith. Often with a mob at their heels, they would make their way into the Jewish district, sometimes even into the shul itself, synagogue, and there hurl threats and abuses upon the Jews for determinedly holding on to their Jewish faith. I don't know, what would it be like if every week, we would, have people invade our personal space, and give these terrible lectures? The Roman ghetto was the worst off, for there the Pope felt duty bound to institute regular preaching to the Jews. Every Shabbos afternoon, 1/3 of the ghetto's population of men, women, and children, can you imagine that the children had to listen to this? Had to appear at a church located at the very edge of the Jewish district. I guess it was at the edge, because God forbid these Christians should sully themselves by going more into the ghetto. Fines were imposed if the proper number failed to show up, and punishment was meted out to any inattentive person. I don't we sometimes fall asleep, let's say during a sermon, right? So, boy, but you could be fined for that if you're not paying attention to what the Christian preacher's saying. The preacher frequently an apostate. Isn't that terrible? I don't know how these people lived with themselves. Apostate, that's somebody who was a Jew, but who left the Jewish fold and is baptized and converts to Christianity. Just terrible. He would take his text from the portion of the Torah read in the from Parsha in the synagogue, because obviously they had the knowledge, they were raised as Jews, and in his message seek to win converts to Christianity by casting contempt upon Judaism. This went on for centuries. I mean, it was just a deplorable state of affairs. All right. I'm usually finished now, but I'll just go on because might as well finish this section. Okay. Most local Jews were impervious to these sermons. All right, we got to sit here, we got to listen to this. I guess you could allow your mind to wander. I don't know what's going on in your head. But there were, unfortunately, a number of converts, and we have on occasion, mentioned their names, and the terrible, terrible damage they did actually to the Jews. And they did opt to leave Judaism, convert to Christianity. Some succumbed to the lure of a freer life and one of greater opportunities. Others felt compelled to convert, as every pretext was employed to bring Jews to baptism against their will. The most common convert was the one who could not bear the grinding poverty of the ghetto and was willing to be supported at public expense. I guess they drew adherence to Christianity, again, from these poor people who were suffering so terribly. And they thought, well, if they convert, their life, will be better off. This I found interesting because I had not known this. The church maintained homes in which converts were both fed and housed, and sometimes for the rest of their lives. And this makes me think, I remember being in Jerusalem, but I think there could be other places in Israel where the church has sometimes made inroads, they, especially when newer immigrants come in and they're very poor, and then they offer, to give them, let's say, free, tuition or come and to feed them, in their monasteries or nunneries, and that's how they get the Jewish population, unfortunately, to convert. Remember, I think it was on Rehov Jabotinsky or something. I don't know. I remember walking in. I was told there was a gate around. I think it was a nunnery, and they said, "Oh, that's a place where they work on converting Jews." Okay. Oh, so these homes are known as houses of catechumens. Because, you have to learn your catechism, right? It's part of a Christian religion. So that's what they call these homes. Homes for the newly converted. These houses were maintained by a special tax, get a load of this, imposed upon the synagogues of the papal states. So like we were paying, for the establishments, which were used for the sole purpose of converting Jews to Christianity. But we, the Jews, had to pay for this. One ghetto which did enjoy some measure of peace was the one in the Bohemian city of Prague. This ghetto was under the direct rule of the Emperor of the Holy Empire, I mentioned that earlier, who was also the King of Bohemia. Sometimes, however, this unfortunately was a source of danger. In 1561, Emperor Ferdinand I suddenly took an oath to expel the Jews from Prague. I don't know, he was all of a sudden this religious fervor, overtook him. They were saved by the heroic efforts of this man, Mordechai Tzemach, a prominent member of the Prague community, who hurriedly journeyed to Rome and succeeded in persuading the Pope to free the emperor from his vow. I am sure there was a transfer of money involved to make this happen. Thus, even during the Renaissance, Jews continued to live confined and precarious lives, never knowing what new laws might ultimately be passed against them. So it's like I'm very sad to have to read all these terrible things. But we're going to learn about those early Achronim who lived during this time period. And there was this flowering of Jewish learning. And we did survive, right? So some, right? All right, everybody listen, so be well. Have a good week. Mr. Chef, I will see you next week. Take care. Okay, bye-bye. Okay, see, my friend disappeared, but let me just, I have to end the meeting.